Technology should work for everyone, but too often it leaves people out. From confusing design to lack of access, entire groups risk being excluded from the digital world many of us take for granted. Product strategies and creative or product wow, Friday afternoon energy there. Product strategist and creative technologist Theresa Benson has led product management and user experience teams in building inclusive technology that anyone can use. In this talk, she explores what digital inclusion really means, why it matters for underserved populations, and how libraries are vital in bridging the gap. With free high-speed internet, maker spaces, digital tools, and training that opens doors for all. Whether you're tech savvy or just curious, you'll leave with a new perspective on how inclusive design and community resources can shape a more welcoming digital future. Everyone, welcome back, Theresa Benson.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. I absolutely, and you'll see throughout today's presentation, I absolutely believe that libraries are one of the last frontiers of equity and inclusion, and they are such an important part of community building. And so it is a deep, deep pleasure to be here in support of Digital Inclusion Week. And let me get over to my presentation here in just a moment. All right. So, as Chris said, I am a product strategist. I work with companies to help them build technology. So, what does that mean? It means that companies may have an idea for what's next for them, or they have a vision of where they want to go, or they have a problem that they're trying to solve. And they often get in their own way. They have assumptions based on products that they've made before on how this next product should work. And oftentimes, having an outside voice, in this case mine, can help companies rethink their strategy in such a way that they can propel themselves forward. And so when Chris asked me to come speak today, I thought it was just a fantastic opportunity to talk about digital inclusivity in the way that I think about it as a product strategist, but also in the way that libraries serve communities in the form of digital inclusion. So, a little bit about me. In addition to being a product strategist, I've also led product management teams. Product managers are the people who are figuring out what features need to go into a product, what features shouldn't be in a product. They negotiate with development teams, engineers. They are accountable to not only leadership like CEOs and chief product officers and CFOs who need to see a financial return on their product, but more importantly, with the users of the product, figuring out who the people are who are going to be touching, interacting, playing with the thing that they're trying to build. And they know it inside and out. And if a good product manager knows the people they're trying to serve as well. And one of my big core values is ensuring that products are inclusive from the start. And where that comes from, oddly enough, is my fourth grade classroom. When I was in fourth grade, Miss Woods was talking about a Tylenol bottle. She was talking about the Tylenol bottle that's actually in the center picture here with the little arrow on the lid that lines up with the other little arrow on the bottom. And, it's safety, right? It was shortly after the cyanide scare. And prior to that, Tylenol bottles, you could either just flip off the top or they unscrewed like the one on the left. And after the poisoning scare of the 80s, we saw packaging change profoundly. And so, a lot of safety features were introduced. Well, that's fine and good, and that serves a purpose. And, it serves users in terms of there is an emotional release that happens when you see that the bottle you're opening hasn't been tampered with. However, the bottle on the right is made for the audience that it serves in a way that has deep meaning for me. I am a quilter, and a large portion of the quilting population is, over the age of 65, 70. And, many struggle with arthritis and things like that. And as a product leader and someone with so many friends who aren't able to use the bottle in the middle, uh, Tylenol coming out with this new packaging, and now we see it across, the spectrum. Any products that are serving an aging population with things like arthritis and whatnot, most of them have gone to a bottle cap more like this. Um, that has such meaning for me. That is inclusive design in a very simple but meaningful way. There's still tamper evident, packaging in this, but where the bottle in the middle, and Miss Woods talked about this, about how it made it more difficult for her own mother to be able to open the bottle. But then at the same time, it was more inclusive because people who couldn't see could feel where those two arrows line up and they were able to open the bottle. There is a lot of design and intent in that lid, but when this new packaging came out, it became clear that product managers, user advocates were part of the conversation, that somebody was really thinking about the population that they serve for arthritis medicine and wondering how might we not only make a product that addresses the pain point they have, which is arthritis, but how might we package it in such a way that the packaging itself serves our audience. So it's just a Tylenol bottle, right? But at the same time, it is representative of so much thought and care that product leaders should be putting into the products that they make. So, why digital inclusion matters? Why is there a week set aside for it? Well, technology, in much the same way that that lid and the inability for some to open it and access the medicine inside, technology determines access to things like jobs or healthcare or education, right? And if technology and how it's packaged and how it's delivered is excluding, well, then it's amplifying existing inequities, right? And so, one of the things that libraries are uniquely positioned to do in a way that other services aren't is they can be a natural leader in access and inclusivity for the populations that they serve. So, inclusivity and digital inclusion, some people, maybe this is a new concept for you. You haven't really thought about it in this way before. So I want to break it down. There's really sort of three components. The first is access, right? Not everybody has the ability to access high-speed internet at home. And this isn't just something that is based on a financial differential. For example, when I first moved to the area, I was living in Palatine, and I had always been an AT&T internet customer. And when I moved to Palatine, I learned that the highest internet service I could get from them was here, whereas, several other providers in the area were over 10 times faster. Now, given that I'm a technologist and, using high-speed internet is part of my everyday, every moment of every day, I had to make the tough decision to leave a brand I'd worked with forever in order to take advantage of a service that met my needs. Well, I was in a financial position to be able to do that. However, for some, that's not possible. And so libraries become a place where, students after school, um, homework is increasingly digital, right? And so having access to high-speed internet outside the classroom becomes incredibly important. Literacy is another thing. Earlier this week, I talked on scams that are preying upon a large swath of population. And so having access to programming that gives people digital literacy becomes incredibly important. And then design, just like the Tylenol bottle, right? Each iteration of that packaging served a purpose, but I'll state that one of them took it a step further and really thought through the user experience of not only the product, the medicine that a consumer would put in their mouth, but the packaging of that as well. And so digital inclusion means not only, and I'll talk about some of the details behind this in a second, but not only things like contrast or the size of a button on a web page or whatever, but also just how is that experience accessed? Is it accessed in a public place where you can't have a speaker going? So you need to have closed captioning. Is it being accessed by someone who has limited visibility? So, uh, you know, there has to be a way to increase font size, and contrast. Those are all aspects of digital inclusion. And libraries are really a refuge at the core of all of this. So, like I mentioned, high-speed internet for job applications, virtual appointments, it's a safe place for teens to go and study together, and access the internet. The library has essential devices, scanners and printers and computers. Not every family in America has the ability to access tools in the same way, and libraries give people the ability to, level up, so to speak. And then, especially with the explosion of maker spaces, for me, 3D printing is a fascinating new area of manufacturing. I spent a lot of time in the industrial automation space, and additive manufacturing was really, really interesting. Well, 3D printing has become all the rage, but I certainly can't afford to just go out and get my own 3D printer and, all of the things that you need in order to try it out, let alone the fact that I have to figure out how to use CAD software and everything like that. Well, guess what? There are libraries who have those resources and make them available at a very reasonable fee for their communities. And they have incredible staff members like Chris who are there to help and educate and serve the communities in which they live. And that is all part of the inclusivity that wraps around digital inclusivity, which is what I'm talking about today. So, when I lead product teams and developers and user interface and experience teams through development of a product, we talk in terms of, success and failure. And yes, okay, fine. If your business success ultimately means you were able to sell the product, it was attractive and met the need of the community that you were trying to sell it to. But It's so much more than that. It's technology that includes everyone. And if you think about it from a commercial and capital perspective, the more people that your product can serve, that opens up your total available market for purchasing your product, right? So little things like captions and subtitles, that's one thing I love about the Schomburg Library and partnering with them, even when I happen to be in Houston versus in person, is, Chris said at the top, he's enabled subtitles, right? That is such a small click of a button, but it can help so many people. I have a hearing disability that has rendered my right ear almost entirely deaf. And so in noisy environments, I often have a hard time understanding what's being said unless I really pay attention, because you lose something when you lose one ear. And so having subtitles available as an option for technology is incredibly important. Voice assistants. So, for people who are able-bodied and have the ability to interact with our hands, um, and interact with technology in that way, voice assistants become a convenience. They're a novelty, but for a huge portion of the population, voice assistants are a lifeline. The fact that we can say things like, Alexa, turn up the thermostat, that is profound, that is a built-in feature rather than something that costs tens of thousands of dollars to customize in a home or an apartment so that a person can interact with something to keep them warm in the winter and cool in the summer, right? So voice assistance is really, really important. Screen readers, building websites. So I spend a lot of time. So outside of being the AI quilter and some of the other things that I do, I do one-on-one consulting with small businesses and small to medium enterprise as well on how to optimize websites, and how to optimize web experience for users. And one of the big things is, yes, search engine optimization, everything like that, but it just so happens that by adding metadata to every single image, describing what the image is, giving the image a title, giving the image a caption, before you deploy a product or a website, interacting with that website using only the keyboard, not using a mouse, hitting tab to go from field to field, does everything follow a logical order? Those are all things that become incredibly critical for someone with low vision who is interacting with a website or interacting with an application, hands-free, or with a screen reader that is literally telling them everything that's on the screen so they can make an informed choice on where they want to navigate next. And then obviously simple design, right? And it's funny, there is a pendulum of what simple design looks like. And a lot of people swung a little bit too far and went to almost entirely icon driven user interface, which then left out a huge portion of the population that didn't have context for what some of these icons meant. So balancing simplicity with usability is incredibly important. What success isn't is technology that excludes. And so this first image is literally, oh, one of my images didn't come through, but this first image is a real user interface for an industrial application. And there is a balance to be struck between providing information that a machine operator needs to have in order to safely and efficiently operate the equipment that they're working with, especially when it's multi-million dollar equipment. And in some cases, I've had customers where every second can cost upwards of $60,000. Every second of downtime when, somebody clicks the wrong button or does the wrong thing costs $64,000 every second, or, a few $1,000s every minute if you're, on a smaller scale. An interface like that is impossible for a user to feel successful in interacting with. Now it has a ton of information. It's, very useful on paper in terms of the intent behind that design, but when it comes to actual implementation, not so much. Jargon heavy interfaces, you should see a picture there with a lot of almost like insider knowledge about how a product functions. And that becomes a huge problem for development teams. We all know exactly the intent behind how this product should work. We have shorthand for different fields that may creep into the actual user interface that users have. And so it becomes unusable for the average consumer who's trying to interact with your product. And then, mandatory paywalls disenfranchise a huge portion of the population that either doesn't have access to credit cards, or is using a public computer and doesn't want to put their credit information in order to access what should be freely available to all. So, what are some things that I do as a product leader to try and help direct how features should be built, and how programs should be implemented? And when I say programs, I mean community programs, but also like literal programs or applications. So, I challenge folks to rethink assumptions. I mentioned that by building inclusive product, you open up the market to more people that can purchase your product. But it is equally important to understand who aren't we designing for, right? Because if you try to design for everyone, in many cases, you'll design for no one. It will not be optimized for the people who really need the product that you're trying to develop. The other thing that we spend a lot of time doing is challenging our user experience and user interface people, looking for jargon, looking for contrast issues. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But, excessive cognitive load, it ought to be incredibly simple to go from step one to step two to step three. And then testing with a diverse population. If you're building a product that needs to work for both highly technical IT administrators, but also a person who walks in off the street, doesn't understand, know, or care what technology, let's say a library purchased, but ought to be able to come in and use a projector or use a presentation device. Well, then you've got to make sure that you are talking to both populations. Go out and ask a high school kid, hey, walk me through how you would turn this on. Go ask someone who is retired and, isn't maybe from the technology community. How would you turn this on? And make sure that the product serves the markets that you intend to serve. So there are really four principles of inclusive design. The first is clarity, making sure to use simple language, making sure navigation is really easy. That's why we often see the buttons that applications want us to interact with being big, bold, and close to our thumbs when it's on a mobile device. Needs to be flexible. I have a t-shirt that says my favorite quilt tool is Control Z. Having some way to undo what you've done, having a way to go back if you change your mind, having a way to increase the size of the font. All of those things become incredibly important. It needs to be accessible. You know, one of the best things that George H.W. Bush did was the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? That idea of accessibility into buildings, right? Accessibility in our communities and on our sidewalks and our streets, making our communities work for the entire community and not just for those who can manage stairs, right? The same should be true in our digital design, you know? And then finally, representation, making sure to design with diverse populations and not just for diverse populations. And what do I mean by that? I mean that as a person who can see, as a person who is highly technical, as a person who, yes, has a hearing disability, but is still able to hear, if I am sitting there imagining a product roadmap that needs to serve a population that maybe has to use a screen reader, who isn't highly technical and who can't hear, if I am sitting in my office imagining their experience without including them early on in the development of the product I'm trying to design, well, then my biases are going to creep into what I develop. I am going to make assumptions that louder is simply better, when in fact, I can tell you, as a person with a hearing disability, louder is most definitely not always better. I can make fonts exceptionally large, but if I have a population that I serve that also is dyslexic, well, then if I'm not using a dyslexia friendly font, it doesn't matter how large the font is, it's still not going to serve that population. So we do things like build empathy maps for our users. And the first thing that we often do is sort of vomit out all of our assumptions onto that empathy map. What are they trying to accomplish? What are they thinking as they go to use our product? What are they feeling when they first open the app and they are this persona, not technical, not familiar with technology, but they need to accomplish a certain goal? What do we want them to feel throughout the process? We want to build confidence. We want to make things feel effortless. And then what we do with this empathy map is not stop once we've filled it out, but we then go speak to the people that we're trying to create for and check our assumptions, right? What do you need in a product like ours? What if I could, wave a magic wand? What is the one thing that you wish it had that you aren't getting today from anybody else? And oftentimes we'll find ourselves crossing out things that we thought were critically important, but it turns out they're not. Um, I'm going to talk in a moment about what WCAG is, but again, like making sure that keyboard only navigation works, because for some people, they are using eye tracking devices to navigate a screen and, navigate from field to field because they can't use a mouse, or they can't even, they can't type. Making sure that every image on our websites and in our applications is carefully described so that a person who can't see the image is able to understand what is being presented on the screen for them to make the right choice. We need to be recruiting diverse user groups, and there are things out there. There are entire software tools like usertesting.com where you can solicit populations that are diverse and don't, aren't included in the developer population at your company or, the product management or user experience population, there are products and services out there that allow you to get those diverse voices as part of the conversation very early on to development. And the result is things like this. So most of us in life, and this is just a screenshot that I pulled from the internet on the left there. Most of us in life, if you are an iPhone user, even if you're an Android user, your user interface looks very similar to the one on the left. Small, the text is very small. If you've got like an iPhone Pro Max and you have a small hand, you often will put the applications that you interact with the most in the lower right-hand quadrant of the screen because that is the place that you can most easily interact with using your thumb. But what a lot of people don't know is that Apple developers have actually integrated into the same user interface that all of us use an assistive version of their user interface. There's an entire accessibility feature set that is in the settings panel that allows you to build user interfaces like the ones you see on the right. So, for some people, it makes much more sense for them to have a list of applications that are big and bold, and they can access, vertically. For others, it makes more sense to have just some big, bold buttons with very intuitive elements on them. And that is how they interact with the same features that you and I take for granted, down at the bottom of the screen or with these little icons. And that's what I mean by digital inclusion. It is the same product. These are the same sorts of applications, but what they've done is they've reduced the cognitive load. You don't have to sit there and figure out where to press for messages or to go look at photos of your grandchildren, right? It is big and bold and out there. So, WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And WCAG, there's several different levels of it that I, as a product leader, need to keep in mind as I'm developing user interfaces and user experiences. And it really boils down to four key principles, and they call it POUR for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable means perceived by the senses that make sense. So, I'm not talking about smell-o-vision for, computers, but, hearing, touch, and sight. So if one of those is lacking, how is your product perceived by a user who doesn't have access to one or more of those senses? Is it operable by people who don't have the ability to use their hands? They must use their voice. They must use eye tracking software, that sort of thing. Is it operable in that way? Is it clearly understandable by all? Like I mentioned before, sometimes there for a while, we went very icon heavy, and people were thinking like marketing teams would get involved. And I should say I'm also a VP of marketing and I help marketing teams out. But, they would get clever with their iconography and it made it really difficult to understand, what am I picking if I pick this icon? What does that actually mean? And so making sure we pair iconography with understandable words. And then robust. And what do I mean by robust? I mean that not all of us have access to the latest iPhone 17, OS. And Not all of us have a laptop, and not all of us have tablets. And, many of us do need to use assistive technology on top of whatever application we're trying to use. And so making sure that our products interact and play nicely with all of these different environments that we might be running in. So making sure that it's accessible to all. Digital equity and digital inclusion means greater life equity. It didn't used to be this way, it didn't. But now it means access to things like employment, online applications, remote interviews, the fact that you can go to a library and have internet access and reserve a small conference room in order to do an interview when maybe your home life is chaotic and you want to present your best self, and you feel that by doing that in a quiet, safe environment is important for you to get that job. Libraries are at the center of that digital equity. Or education, the fact that maybe you don't have Wi-Fi at home, or a reliable internet source at home, and you can come to the library to take remote learning classes, or take classes and attend lectures like the couple that I've done this week and the other ones that are available through the library system, to advance your skills and, become more digitally native. That is another aspect of digital equity. Healthcare. There are, especially in rural communities, less and less local doctors. You have to travel farther and farther to get health care. And so we've seen an explosion of doctors available through telemedicine. However, if you don't have reliable access to internet, well, then you don't have access to healthcare. If you have no transportation, or very little transportation, certainly not one that's going to go 50 miles, and you don't have access to internet, well, then again, that refuge for society, our local library, becomes increasingly important. You can manage your prescriptions online, right? Versus needing to make a phone call if that's not available to you. And then obviously social, right? Bridging the loneliness gap, having a place to go where you can connect with others in your society is increasingly important. So, some personal takeaways for me, and that I hope you will take away as well, is, you know, turn on captions if you are a marketer or a small business, or you want to be a social influencer. Take a moment to turn on captions for all the videos you create and share. And increasingly, this becomes important with the advent of automatic translation, right? When we turn on captioning, even though I speak in English, somebody might be able to read captions in Spanish or Ukrainian or Polish. Yeah. So making sure that you're doing even those small little things can mean so much to someone that you're designing for. Make sure that you add alternative text, describe the images that you post and share. Don't just post a picture, but make sure you include a few sentences about what that picture is. Because for people who have low or no vision, they want to participate in social media just as much as the next person. And if we sighted people can take a moment, just take a moment and add a couple sentences to describe what you've just posted, that gives a screen reader the ability to tell someone what they're looking at if they would be able, if they were sighted, that they can experience that same connection in society. And then check contrast. Brand directors often come up with very, very clever and beautiful color schemes that make absolutely no sense for inclusivity. And so I recommend using a contrast checker. And those contrast checkers, as long as you have a 4.5 or higher contrast ratio, you're fine. And so what you can do is just take a moment and check your brand colors against a contrast checker like this. So this is just generating random ones, right? But you need to be thinking about red-green color blindness. You need to be thinking about um, visibility. You know, this is pretty decent visibility, but you can come across ones that are here. If I just dial this up a little bit, it'll probably be hideous, but just to give you an example, you know, that's kind of cute. You know, I could see this being very bubble gummy, maybe a children's brand or something like that. But the average Joe, they may be able to read it, but as you look at accessibility for all and inclusivity for all, that's a really, really harsh color contrast that can hurt someone's eyes or make it impossible for them to read what's actually on the screen. So making sure that you are checking things like contrast. Let's see. And then, as far as us as a community, what are some things that we can do? Support your local library. You know, it's not just financial, although I know that they appreciate that. You know, volunteer or advocate for funding for digital programs and more digital programs. Mentor, you know, help a neighbor or help a colleague, or, you know, I spend a lot of time in the quilting community talking about technology. Help them learn new digital skills. Help them gain access to technology that they would not normally have given, you know, where they are in their lives. And speak up. Challenge exclusionary design in your workplace. You know, if you're on a product team, take a second to ask the question, are we, you know, have we got the user voice in the room as we're developing our products? And, you know, look at community services. Are we truly serving the populations we claim to? Is there anything we're missing? Check your assumptions. Make sure that, you know, we all come to everything with bias. And so check your bias. What are you assuming somebody has or doesn't have in before you know, deliver a product or service? Technology has immense power to open doors. And I just want to show you an example. I spent a lot of time advocating for artificial intelligence, and I want to show you what's possible when everyday people are empowered with technology to help each other out. You're going to see a story of a young man, and his brother used artificial intelligence to develop something amazing for him. So I'm going to hit play and we'll just take a moment and watch this together. My brother Ben is 29, and this is the first time he's ever received or sent.
Hey, Teresa, we lost your sound when you muted yourself. Teresa?
Faces just don't work for him. And before he lost the use of his hands, the device he had never really fit. So he went almost a whole decade only saying yes and no. But then he moved in with me and my wife, Nancy, and I made it my mission to give him some independence back. I built a system using AI and two buttons, one on each side of his head, so he could navigate with the one thing he could do reliably. The menus are big and clear for his vision, and over time, we added phrase boards, a predictive keyboard, access to all of his favorite shows and movies, custom games, and even Google and YouTube searches. But this new messenger app is something different. Ben has been typing messages. For the first time, our family is able to have real conversations with him at his pace through direct messaging.
Beam and Penny reacted thumbs up. Glad to hear. How are Nancy and Ori? Send message. G. Good. Send. DM from Beam and Penny. Good.
I had no idea where this mission would take us, but it's been a dream come true for our family. We want to share the love, so we made the code for Ben's entire system free and open source so anyone can use it. If you love seeing Ben's joy and want to support, follow our story and join our community. We're just getting started.
I love this thing.
So, technology has incredible power to do good. AI has incredible power to do good. And frankly, we all have incredible power to do good by building inclusivity into our products, into the services we offer. And I really, really appreciate you all taking time out of your Friday afternoon to learn a little bit more about digital inclusion. I run Radiant Meatball, which is a business and strategy consulting firm. I also am the founder of something called the AI Quilter. And if you're curious to learn more and increase your digital literacy, I've published a book called Digital Muse, which is for folks who are curious about AI and want to bring it into your creative process. I know there are a few things that have popped up in the chat, and I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that you all have. But again, thank you so much for your desire to learn about digital inclusion and being here today.
There we go. Theresa, thank you so much for joining us again this week, for adding a second session in your roster. The chat was actually asking if we were recording the session, which we are, and you'll get a link to that recording, as well as a link to Theresa's website in that after action email that I'll send out shortly after we wrap up here today. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, whatever's easiest. Gosh, I typically always have a question, and I think just because I've asked you questions already this week, my brain's like, how do we prime the pump today? Uh, when did you first start like really advocating for digital inclusion, Theresa? Like when did you to see that as a need?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, I thought a lot about, inclusivity as I was getting ready, and I was like, when did I? So, in addition to the Tylenol bottle, I I had a remarkable childhood in that my mom, um, I was raised by a single mom, and my mom sent me to a day camp that was run by the Easter Seals. And it was an amazing experience where both able-bodied and differently abled children went to camp together. So I had friends in wheelchairs. I had friends who, were blind or deaf, and they were all part of my camp community. And so we had swimming pools with ramps, and they would assign some of us to help our friends be able to navigate like obstacle courses and things like that, so that I grew up in like just it with that as part of my childhood, and it wasn't strange or different. It just was how camp was.
Yeah.
And as I moved into my professional career, the first part was I was in sales and I was in the semiconductor industry. I have an electrical engineering background. But when I moved into product marketing is really when some of that from my childhood came into my professional life in a meaningful way. Because as a product marketer, your job is to tell a story in the way your audience needs to hear it. Not so many product marketers make a mistake in that they tell the story of their company in the way that their leadership wants to tell it. And that doesn't reach people in the same way. And so, you know, by having to sit and really think about who am I trying to talk to and what perspective are they bringing to the website when they land here and they're trying to figure out if my product is the right product for them. That's really when digital inclusivity started to creep into my, you know, I don't know, into my brain. And then as I progressed in my professional career and I had the opportunity to be a product manager and then a vice president of product management and work with user experience teams, I really got to see, I mean, the people who choose user experience as a profession, they are the angels of the technology community. They really are because they sit there and they challenge, they challenge developers who want to make something one way and they go, yeah, but the user doesn't know X, Y, and Z. So we actually need seven more steps under the hood in order to make it as effortless as possible. But yeah, so it was probably when in my professional career when I was in product marketing that some of that inclusivity and stuff that I had had as childhood in my childhood started to come back and made me uniquely positioned to lead product teams to make things more inclusive.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, but before we go, thank you for helping us wrap Digital Inclusion Week. Theresa, we won't have you back here at Schaumburg until April.
Yeah.
She'll be back to talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because we have it a couple times, but this we're talking about like using AI as a creative tool,
Mhm.
and which obviously Theresa does with her quilts. But where else, I know other libraries in the area have been connecting with you to come out to.
Yeah.
If you teach other classes, where can our patrons find out where to find you if they want to learn more from
Yeah. So, um, all of my classes, both for quilters as well as for everyday people, are available at the AI Quilter, THEAI quilter.com. And you'll see in the menu it says classes. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a website for my management and strategy consulting company, radiantmeatball.com. And if you can kind of just see, I'm a big old radiant meatball. But that's where small business owners, enterprise leaders who are wanting to do different can reach out to me.
and
And
go for it.
I have several classes like on how to prompt like a pro, how does AI actually work, AI 101. I teach at Quilt Guilds, uh, assisted living community. I teach anywhere that'll have me, that as long as there are people curious to learn, I want to be there to help them learn.
To answer the question that just popped up, Teresa will be back with us on April 9th. Those programs are very much not live yet. Our winter programs aren't even live yet. I'm just a crazy person who plans far in advance for moments like this, because Teresa's program is actually going to align with something else happening in April that we can't talk about yet. But we will have, I know Teresa's coming back in the summer as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
April and July in Schaumburg. I'm going to be teaching. I'm going to be teaching in Algonquin. It's not firmed up the exact date, but I'll be at the Algonquin Library. I'm going to be doing something at the Grays Lake Library around AI safety for families. I also have some really fun programming coming down the line for like parents and children who, because when I was a little kid, in second grade, Sister Alberta Ann had us in reading class write our own stories. And so I wrote a phenomenal book called Harriet the Talking Horse. And I want to use AI to help kids experience the joy that I had as a kid. And you can actually go to my YouTube channel, the AI Quilter, and you'll see some of the stories that quilt guilds, libraries, kids are making. I've got a little playlist that I've started with just uplifting, adorable stories about everything. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Anybody who's interested who's on this afternoon's program that wasn't with us on Tuesday night, Theresa spoke about AI scams and how to navigate through those. That program was also recorded and is available on the Schomburg Library YouTube page. So you can go find that. The link that you get sent from me won't be that video, but once you're there, you can go to the page from that link and find it easily enough. But otherwise, Theresa, I'm going to let you get on with your rest of your day. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you, everyone, for joining in for another program with the Schomburg Library. We'll see you all next time. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye-bye.